kind of last one, what do you call it? Bugger it. Meh. Ahoy hoy and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk. I'm your lady and you are my man, Shaun Polidano. And we are back to review and discuss everything that occurred at the Canadian Grand Prix in Montreal. As always, I'm joined by the power of love himself, Aaron Best.
Are you trying to do Celine Dion puns today?
Yeah, Celine Dion is an icon. Plus, she's a Canadian darling and the queen of power ballads, which, you know what, is absolutely gay, and it's a no-brainer to add her to this week's episode.
Well, actually, I Am Your Lady and You Are My Man is my parents' wedding song.
Oh!
Yeah, so anytime I hear it, I just am taken back because I was actually there at my parents' wedding.
Bastard child.
Yes.
We don't need to go in the life story, but we can leave it there.
not even my actual dad, it's my stepdad. Anyway, as far as your little decision on puns today,
yeah.
I hear you, I see you, but now we need to move on.
Yes, slay bitch.
I thought you'd like that. But it is just the two of us this week, and we actually have a lot to talk about with this race, so we should probably get straight into it.
Yeah, we had one of this year's most exciting races in Montreal this week. So let's talk about it and get through the 2024 Canadian Grand Prix.
So it was another standard race weekend this week. 3 free practice sessions, a qualifying session, and then the main Grand Prix. This week we're at the Circuit Gilles Villeneuve in Montreal, a location known for the groundhogs that live on the track.
Come on, groundhog.
As well as some fairly consistent wet weather. Mostly F1 races will continue in wet weather provided there are no large areas of standing water on the track. That is, the track can be wet but no puddles.
Come on, puddles.
When the track is wet, some aspects of the race will change though. A wet track is declared by the FIA during the session. If the FIA do not say the track is wet, the teams are not allowed to start running their wet weather setups without incurring a penalty, as Ferrari found out this weekend. Once a track is declared wet, however, the teams will often return their car to the pit lane for a change of tyre. There are 2 types of wet weather tyre that the teams can use, a green-walled intermediate tyre and a blue-walled wet tyre. The thing you'll notice about these 2 tyre types is that they start to look a little bit more like the tyres you would see on your own car. That is, the 2 sets of wet weather tyres both have grooves in the tread. Often when people talk about the tread of a tyre, they're actually thinking about the grooves. But fun fact, the tread is actually the rubber and the grooves are a lack of tread. So a normal F1 slick tyre is actually entirely tread. The problem with a tyre being entirely tread in wet weather though, is that they trap a layer of water between them and the road. This means the tyre doesn't touch the road, has nothing to grip onto, and the car will slip and slide dangerously on the water. This is known as aquaplaning. The grooves in the intermediate and wet tyres give somewhere for this layer of trapped water to escape, allowing the tread to come back into contact with the road and giving the drivers grip again. The wet tyres have more grooves than the intermediate tyres, meaning they can move more water out of the way. The downside to all this is the tyres have less total tread because of the gaps. So, the tyres' total grip is then reduced and the driver cannot push them as hard. They will also wear out a lot faster as there's less tread to be worn away while driving. As the track dries, this becomes more and more of a problem for the cars. Making a decision to move to intermediate tyres, wet tyres, or back onto slicks at a certain point can make or break your race. Making the wrong decision means less grip, and less grip means slower laps or a loss of control.
So, Aaron, the entire time where you're saying that pre-race kind of stuff and saying wet, all I kept on thinking about was the little meme Instagram thing where it's the dog and it's like, this is me wet, and this is me wet. Wet.
This is Canada wet, and this is Canada wet.
This is the wet. That or Nicole
Scherzinger.
Yeah, which I can't even say her last name, and I'm feeling very wet now. Thank you, Mr. Weatherman. Now on to me. Free practice 1 was delayed by 23 minutes due to a lot of that standing water on the newly resurfaced Montreal track. Once on the way, though, the session saw drivers using intermediate tyres to help navigate the slippery surface. Gilles aquaplaned into the wall and damaged his car, which was not a great start for Kick Sauber. In the last 5 minutes of the practice session, drivers got to switch to slick tyres to test the drying track. Turn 8, though, proved to be very challenging, with Daniel Ricciardo, Max Verstappen, Lance Stroll, Logan Sargent, and Valtteri Bottas spinning off into the grass. We were all excited for this. Alpine had made sure that Jack Doohan, as their reserve driver, was going to be doing free practice 1. Sadly, though, he only managed to do 2 laps during his allocated session, which is an absolute shame. It would have been amazing to see 3 Aussies on the track all at one time. But the upcoming rookie is impressing the Sky Sports commentary team on his guest role on certain tracks. By the end of the session, Lando Norris topped the timesheets, followed by Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc. With the rain expected later in free practice 2, drivers rushed out on slick tyres to gather data. Rose missteps began early, sending Leclerc out on intermediates when the track was absolutely dry. Cute and adorable groundhogs were found on the circuit, causing several drivers to swerve and abort laps and adding to the chaos. Turn 14, the notorious Wall of Champions claimed several victims throughout the weekend. A dry free practice 3 session allowed teams to push their cars, but the grip was an issue with the limited rubber on the track due to all that rain. Zhou had another mishap, crashing and damaging his car in the rear. The session ended with Lewis Hamilton setting a 1:12, Verstappen close behind in P2 and Russell in P3. In Q1 of qualifying, the Red Bulls struggled, with Verstappen moving from P15 to P1 on his final lap. Perez, however, couldn't advance past P16. Tsunoda impressed in P2, Hamilton in P3, and Albon in P4. Hulkenberg's tyre and rear wing issues left him down in P19. In Q2, Mercedes showed their strength, with Russell and Hamilton securing P1 and P2. The V-Cubs also performed pretty well, with Tsunoda securing P4 and Ricciardo P7. In a shocking turn of events, though, both Ferraris were knocked out, with Sainz securing P12 and Leclerc dropped into P11 after a stellar lap from Albon in his Williams. In Q3, the competition was very fierce, with just 0.796 seconds between P1 and P10. Russell set the early benchmark of a 1:12, which Verstappen then matched, but his lap was done later on in the session, which meant he was then pushed to P2. Norris was close behind in P3, and it was a good day for Ricciardo and Alonso, who respectfully secured P5 and P6. Race day brought wet weather, allowing teams to switch to intermediate tyres or the full wets at the start of the race. Haas took the gamble on those full wets, initially allowing them to surge through the field, but after all that pace at the start, they fell back after those early pit stops. The battle for the top 5 was very intense, with frequent position changes due to DRS, pit strategies, and undercuts or overcuts. The key moments of that top 5 battle were Norris passing Verstappen during DRS, then overtook Russell for P1 on lap 21. Then a safety car on lap 26 saw Verstappen, Russell and Piastri pit, but Norris stayed out, leading to an undercut which dropped him back to P3. The switch from intermediates to slicks saw Norris extend his lead for 2 laps before pitting. Verstappen regained P1 as Norris struggled with those cold tyres at the start of coming back to the race. Russell and Norris made mistakes fighting for P2, leading to some amazing racing. Mercedes then both pitted their cars on lap 58 for those fresh tyres, allowing them to chase down the leaders. They overtook Piastri, with Russell and Hamilton battling for P3. The race concluded with Max Verstappen in P1, Norris in P2, and Russell in P3. It was also a great day for the Canadian driver, Lance Stroll, who secured P7. This was a big week also for off-track news. The FIA and F1 announced the 2026 car regulations, featuring smaller cars, 50-50 engine to battery power, and active aero. Esteban Ocon announced his departure from Alpine, and he also addressed the social media abuse and backlash he received during the Monaco crash. Sergio Perez confirmed a 2-year extension with Red Bull, meaning Sainz's top team options are now off the table. Yuki Tsunoda will remain at VCARB, and rumours continue to spool up with Oliver Biermann joining Haas in 2025. Williams also hinted at interest in Carlos Sainz, with a lot of talks with him, but also with talks with Valtteri Bottas too. Pride Month celebrations saw Aston Martin F1 employees attend Birmingham Pride. Alpine and Mercedes sport rainbow Pride logos on their cars, while McLaren will have Racing Pride logos on the steering wheels of their cars for these races. What a big week and what a fantastic weekend. Aaron, let's talk about Red Bull.
Yeah, so Red Bull was an interesting dynamic because we had Verstappen up the front performing quite well. Still not his previous dominance. He is still now kind of competing with other drivers. And then we had Perez, fresh off a new contract, trying to show people that he didn't deserve it. I don't know.
Yeah, why do you reckon he's kept at Red Bull then? Why do you reckon they gave him the extension? Because it's like 1 year plus, isn't it?
Something like that. But it's because they had no one else.
You reckon? What do you mean no one else? They have Sainz.
They don't want Yuki Tsunoda.
Yep.
Ricciardo is not performing.
Mm-hmm.
Sainz would be a risk to Verstappen.
Correct.
And they don't want Carlos Sainz Sr. and Jos Verstappen in the same room.
Yep.
That doesn't really leave them anyone else.
Yeah. My thinking on this would then be Perez is more than happy. Well, he's probably not internally happy about it, but he is the number 2 driver. He needs to then play ball. He's able to be kept on the grid. So why not just suck it up?
Yeah, as a number 2 driver, he doesn't do too badly normally. The last few races, he's been his consistency that he's having a problem with.
Yeah, I think it's been 3 DNFs so far, right, with those races. So he needs to really pull something together in the next couple of races because that championship gap between the teams is getting very close now.
Yes. So that's the risk of Perez for Red Bull is that he's not able to pull his own weight when it comes to the Constructors' Championship. But as far as a second driver goes, he's kind of where they need someone to be. He's not a risk to Verstappen and Jos Verstappen's like pride or anything like that. So they don't really have another option. There's no one else on the grid that they would probably choose to take. Like potentially they might eventually say, oh, we might offer something to like Albon or someone like that. But he's secured with Williams.
Yeah.
So like Perez is the only option to them that isn't a risk.
Yeah. He just had a bit of an awful weekend overall, right? Like he bumped into an Alpine at the start of the race, crashed the car, ruining the rear wing, and also got a penalty for that there too and a fine because that car was destroyed.
And they kept it out on track to get it back to the pits.
Yeah, because could you imagine if the wing then fell off?
I think they kind of hoped for the chance to get it back to the garage and maybe do something and get it back out onto the track.
Yeah.
But obviously that wing was destroyed and the rear wings can't be replaced the way that the front wings can. So it's not like, oh, we'll just take a 30-second pit stop and get the car back out.
Just bolt it back on.
They at least tried to get the car back to the pits under its own devices, which means that the car can continue the race if it wants. But it was a mangled car.
Yeah, it was. On the flip side, though, like whilst Verstappen, I feel like had a very tricky weekend, he drove exceptionally well. He is a masterclass in driving whilst he is, you know, a champion and we're getting a little bit over the fact that he is great. The way he drove, the strategy with the team in terms of pitting them when he did, allowed him to go and win the race. And rightly so, I think, in my eyes.
I think it's great at the moment that we're seeing that the Red Bull car isn't quite so dominant. So like the last few years, even if Max wasn't great, like obviously we're looking at someone like Sergio. Sergio was still generally second or third most races in like 2022. 2023, he was a little bit all over the shop. But the car was still so dominant that it didn't really matter who was driving, the car was winning. Now we're seeing a time where we've got Mercedes, Ferrari, not so much this week, but Ferrari normally, and McLaren all have cars that can compete with the Red Bull. So the dominance of the Red Bull is now because of the driver. So we're seeing how good Max is as a driver because he has a car that isn't just blanket dominance.
Yeah, speaking of dominance, where the hell did Mercedes come on like this week? They were very dominant from that qualifying onwards for the race. They were fantastic this weekend.
If you go back to race 1 of the season, they were kind of somewhere. Race 2 and 3, they dropped down. Since race 3, was race 3 Australia? Yes.
I think so, yes.
So Australia was like their lowest point as far as pace and position goes this year. And then if you look at that, they've literally been following a really clear trajectory. Like it's almost a straight line progressing up towards where they are now. So if they continue this pace, they will be back to where Mercedes were 2021. They'll be back competing with the Red Bulls consistently. So they're actually doing really well. And it's actually a really consistent improvement week on week to see them to get to this point. And we kind of weren't paying attention to them the last few weeks because McLaren and Ferrari beat them to those improvements. So we didn't really notice that just off to the left, Mercedes were doing really well as well. They just hadn't done as well as McLaren or Ferrari.
Again, the jury's probably going to still be out there because it was one race, one weekend that we've just seen them to be so competitive. Both drivers were pretty onto it, but also both of them made a lot of mistakes there too. It was very 50-50 on their driving style within there. Like Hamilton was not happy about his qualifying, and you could see that in the post-qualifying interviews. like making those mistakes, not getting that position. What were your thoughts on Russell when he was battling out with Norris?
There's something about the way that Russell drives that makes me feel like he is just not as, like, you look at a driver like Oscar, who is just so cool and calm and collected behind the wheel of that car. And then you've got Russell, who seems to get a little bit aggressive or take risks, and they often just don't pay off as well as he would hope. And I don't know if it is yet. He kind of feels the pressure sitting behind the wheel and he starts to make those silly mistakes, or he just tries to push the car or push his driving beyond the limits of what he's able to do. And it's disappointing because if he just pulled away and took a little bit of time to make sure that he was being consistent and calm and like driving nicely, he probably wouldn't put himself into those risks, and he probably would just be good because of the fact that he's been good.
Yeah, I feel like that would have been a great couple of opportunities where he could have led the race and probably won it, but those mistakes costed him that, or at least that track position to go and do something a little bit different. Again, hats off to Mercedes. They both did very well this weekend, but I do think that their like driving style and making those mistakes are going to hurt them.
Some of their strategic decisions did cost them track position in this race, which is why he didn't lead the race as long as he should have. Like, they didn't pit him early enough to get off of the inters onto slicks. And so he ended up being overtaken because Verstappen and Norris pitted, I think, 2 laps before he did. And yeah, there were a few mistakes there that they made, but they made up for it at other parts, and consistently they are improving week on week. So it'd be interesting in 2 or 3 races time whether they will be in the contention for a win.
Yeah. Speaking of maybe the role reversal, who didn't improve, who basically downgraded themselves to nothing, Ferrari. Oh, the disappointment that I had was just insane.
There was no part of the weekend where Ferrari did the right thing, and I don't know why. Like, you saw in free practice, we saw that they sent Charles Leclerc out on inters, and
but it was dry.
The track hadn't even been declared wet, so they got a $5,000 fine.
Yeah,
and they had to re-pit him again. And then during the race, they put him onto hard tires, even though it was raining. And then all he had to do was limp around the track so that he could get back to the pits so that they could change his tires again. I think before he retired, he pitted like 6 times.
I think they just knew that nothing was working well for Ferrari, and they would just try different things. But it's like throwing the bloody spaghetti at the wall. The strategy decisions this weekend at Ferrari was an absolute shit show.
And then Sainz had his mistake, ended up spinning out and knocking out Albon, which was really disappointing.
It really was. I think when we were both watching it, we were both going, oh, poor Albon.
Just watching the crash, watching the back of Sainz's car just nudge him into the wall. It was heartbreaking.
Yeah. Again, just a really bad weekend. I do love that meme that keeps on getting reoccurring because it's Ferrari and it's a pit wall of them just looking like clowns, like the clowns have been drawn on their face. That was it. That was this weekend. It was an absolute shit show. I think Fred Vasseur came out going, yep, we can't have any more of this. This is like the one time to bloody go and do it, and we never want to go and do this again. It was just from the day of arriving in Montreal, it was an absolute cock up.
Yeah, I did love the commentators after both cars were retired, and the commentators were like, and there are still people on the pit wall. Not sure why, but they're still there.
Oy, poor Ferrari.
We literally, last episode, were talking about the fact that all they had to do was realistically beat Perez. And had they kept both cars in the points this weekend, had they gotten both cars into the points this weekend, where Perez was, they would have gotten enough points to put them so close to being first place in the constructors. And now they're almost behind McLaren.
Yeah, I think it was, again, everything was set up from qualifying. You know, not getting into Q1 meant that they were always going to be on the back foot, potentially to score any points based on the performance of that car. DNFs, when they had the opportunity for points, is just disappointing, especially for that championship trophy. McLaren did super well, though.
Yes, they did really well. It did also showcase some of the struggles that the drivers are having. Like we've discussed before, the fact that Oscar just seems to struggle with pace towards the end of the race because he just hasn't managed his tyres properly. He hasn't learned how to manage his tyres with that car, which the car is established as being a difficult car to drive. That's why Ricciardo never was able to tackle it. Lando has learned to deal with the difficulty of the car and actually excel. Oscar's done really well at getting the right kind of footing, but there's still just intricacies of the car that are just messing him up.
Which again, give him hopefully maybe this year. I'm hoping he's only a year and a half into his contract with McLaren, right? So
being in
F1, sorry, in general, right? So hopefully he'll be able to go and manage that, or hopefully learn and adapt to that McLaren a little bit more. I think they're both the most consistent in terms of pace, qualifying pace as two drivers, and they just perform brilliantly. They were both driving very well earlier on in the race there too. And Norris had such a great drive, overtaking with DRS a couple of the cars to get in front of Verstappen. That McLaren is looking hot.
It is interesting to kind of think about the fact that next year, for example, we will have hopefully competitive Ferraris and we will have Hamilton and Leclerc behind the wheel. And then we'll have hopefully still very competitive McLarens with Norris and Piastri behind the wheel. What that could mean, I think that the Drivers' Championship next year will still probably go to Max. He's still such a good driver. But I think we'll have a really tight race for the Constructors' Championship because Verstappen can't win the Constructors' Championship on his own again anymore. And to have the other two teams have two drivers that are consistent compared to Red Bull's one driver that could potentially be out of the points every second race, you might see that even though Max is number one driver, Constructors is going to McLaren or Ferrari, which would be fantastic. Ferrari hasn't won since, I think, 2008 and McLaren earlier than that.
Ooh, maybe that could be my next prediction to up the ante a little bit this season will be, a McLaren championship win. Team win.
I did see months and months ago, I saw a YouTube video that was talking about a particular Ferrari sports car that was bought out in 2008 and it has badges on it that mention the 2008 championship title.
Okay.
The thing is that was the only car to ever include a mention of their championship win. And they have not won a championship since they bought that car out.
Cursed.
It was like a cursed sports car that is just reminding them that they haven't won anything since they minted that little coin to put on the dash.
It was some sort of Italian nonna spitting at the car because she saw it, basically. What's your thoughts on, because I got an idea and vibe about it. Do you think Norris was hampered by strategy during the race?
I don't think he was hampered by strategy. I think things just didn't go his way. So in Miami, he got a safety car at the perfect point for him and it made his race and he won. This week, he had a safety car that came at a bad point for him and a perfect point for Verstappen, and it made Verstappen's race and he won. The same things that we were talking about a few weeks ago for Miami to say, oh, how good is it for Lando? And it was mostly just the luck of a safety car. This week, it just didn't work in his favor. It was the luck of a safety car working to Max's favor, and it was the unluck of a safety car for him. So I don't necessarily think McLaren made any strategic bad decisions. It was just the wrong point in time. I think had the safety car came out something like 20 seconds earlier, that Norris would have had the track position to pit. But where he was when the safety car was called, he was too late. He couldn't get into the pits.
Yeah, I also wonder about were McLaren going to be able to go and do a double stack if that was going to be the case too? They weren't going to then leave Piastri out, right?
He got a penalty for that.
What do you mean?
So under the safety car, Norris was driving, apparently, he was called to the stewards and they got a fine or he's got a penalty for next week. He was driving slower than he should have been to give the McLaren team enough time to pit Oscar and get him out so that they wouldn't double stack. So apparently the stewards decided that Norris was driving too slow under the safety car to create that gap. And so he got a fine.
Well, Norris is now only 7 points behind Leclerc for second place of the championship.
It'll be interesting to see if we continue to have these really competitive races, will there be more chances for Red Bull to have a problem and Max not win, and we potentially towards the end of this season, because we've still got so much racing. We've got racing right through to December at the moment. So
yeah, we're not even we're not even a third in, right? Like
yeah,
it's a big calendar this year. Big calendar.
so we've got so many more races. There is a potential that if Red Bull do have a terrible second half of the year, that we do start to see Norris competing with Max and Leclerc competing with Max.
Well, we're starting to see it now, and I think we're all hungry for it. So I'm hoping that they'll be able to continue to battle it out. Like I said in my race summary, those top 5 throughout the entire race were just beautifully competitive. Lots of overtaking, strategic work. It was a fun thing to watch. Why not talk about Aston Martin, but also let's just throw nothing at Aston Martin, because whilst I believe it's maybe getting back to form for them, like P6 and P7 is probably pretty good compared to the last couple of races, they are behind Mercedes now.
Yeah,
It's backwards. That's backwards.
They have really struggled for pace this entire year. Like in some races, they are behind VCarb. Just said VCarb instead of RB.
Come on, VCarb. Well, it's VCarb.
It's because you wrote it into our notes that it's VCarb.
VCarb it is.
Yeah, like in some races, they have been behind VCarb. This race, they did pretty well, which I always love to see a driver do well in their home race. So well done for Stroll, even though no one likes Stroll.
Oh. I also take back a little bit of my aggression at Ocon and Gasly too from last week. With everything that did occur, I shouldn't be so mean to the drivers. There could be one day we could meet them, and that could be amazing. But yes, I still don't like you.
When we are talking about driver movements, and we discussed that Sainz's position is becoming more and more difficult because all of the top team opportunities for him have closed up, we do see a lot more people talking about Stroll's position at Aston Martin. Like, yes, he brings in money because of Daddy, but
Daddy already owns the race team anyway. Like, what additional money does it bring?
Well, it's more that Dad will stop paying if Lance isn't given the seat. And the thing is, even I'm guilty of it. When I see Lance and I see his performance, I still consider him a rookie, but he's been driving for years. In our minds, he shouldn't be considered a rookie. But because he just hasn't found that footing, he just hasn't gotten to the level, in my mind, of your Ocons and Gaslys and Landos. He's been driving just as long next to.
Yeah. To give Lance some credit, he is very good in the wet. I think, again, during those wet moments, he was able to go and put down some decent lappage and times within there. Again, it's nothing much else to say about Aston Martin, because I just feel like they're going backwards, and something needs to be probably said, done when it comes to summer break to go and change up that entire team, or at least add something to make them faster again.
Yeah, we'll see what they do, but yeah, like this race was good. Let's see if they can maintain it when they get to Spain.
But nipping at their heels are likes of VCarb and Haas. Like, what are they going to be doing?
Haas did a great thing at the start of this race with their race strategy.
It was fun to see, actually,
Like,
something different.
Watching them start quite far back in the pack, but because they were on the full wets and everyone else was on the inters, they had the grip to just really power through the pack. Like, they just got so close to being competitive with the top. I think at one point Magnussen was up near P3.
I think, yeah, battling for P3 or P2. Like, it was, yeah, right at the top there.
And then, like, obviously they had to, at a certain point, pit, and they had to pit early because the wets weren't going to last very long. And I think they did make that decision for Magnussen at the right time. They then just kept Hulkenberg out for some reason, and he just kept lapping on these old, destroyed, wet tires, and he just kept falling further and further back. And I think at one point I even mentioned to you, I'm like, what happened to Hulkenberg? And you're like, what do you mean? He just doesn't have pace. I'm like, yeah, but he's lost 6 seconds in 2 laps. And then the commentators go, yeah, he's losing 3 seconds a lap. I'm like, shit,
Those
that's
tires
a
need
lot.
to come off, yeah.
Like, why would they have kept him out? I think they kept him out like 3 or 4 or 5 laps longer than Magnussen. And he just lost all of the benefit that he had gained from having that strategy in the first place.
I think it comes back to your little tech summary at the start of it, right? So the wets work well when there is enough water on the track. Once there is not, and that's where the inters, where everyone else is on, it's more of a balance there. they were going to be slower at the start, but once the track dries out, those inters are the perfect tyre to be on.
Yeah.
Whatever game that they then got by battling it out, whilst it was amazing to watch and very entertaining, by the time you then factor in that pit stop, they're going to be at the back anyway, because it's not additional gain time. It is maybe a lip service for entertainment, which you then saw. Like they, at the end of the entire race, they finished P11 and P12. They were just outside of the points, which is heartbreaking for such an amazing start.
I think they took the risk in that most of the drivers were expecting to make 2 pit stops. And I think most drivers ended up making multiple pit stops. They expected that if they started on the inters, they would need to pit at a certain point for another set of inters and then pit at a later point to go on to slicks.
I think also at that point too, maybe Haas were waiting for another shower of rain. Hence why maybe they kept them out there too for a little bit longer, or to get a pit under a safety car.
I think, yeah, they were hoping that maybe they would get away with doing wets onto inters, onto slicks, and the timing of their pit stops and potentially, yeah, holding out for a safety car, like that Hulkenberg opportunity in particular, they gained maybe like 7 positions or something like that. And yes, they would have lost some of them to pit, but then all of those cars would have had to pit for new inters shortly anyway. So the loss that they suffered from the pace issues that they had by staying out just destroyed any chance of them being competitive. I reckon they probably could have pushed for like a P8, P9 up against those V-carbs.
Yeah, but those V-carbs were driving very well. Like Ricciardo had a very solid weekend, securing P8. And Tsunoda was doing fantastically well, but just span out at those last bits of the race there. Like I thought V-carb were onto it. They looked fantastic.
I think it was a great opportunity for Ricciardo. He had Jacques Villeneuve
roast him, basically.
Roasting him. And Ricciardo's response was kind of, fuck you. And then he raced really well. So maybe he just needs more guest commentators to have a go at him each week.
Yeah, maybe, but I don't think that should always then just be your race vibe.
That's the big thing that's been talked about Ricciardo over the last couple of years. And he's even talked about the fact that he forgot about the racing. He got caught up in being a celebrity. He got caught up in being a brand ambassador. Like he started focusing on his winery and on Optus and on being the face of Red Bull and RB and all these other things. And he got caught up being that personality, which does make him a really great opportunity for a team, but his racing suffered because of it. And that's, I think, what Jack also pointed out.
Everyone wants to bang him. I will want to bang him, but I'm only going to bang him if he's actually going to be competitive in the car, right? And to Jack's point, he makes a point out of it. I don't think he should have gone as far with some of the commentary that he did make against Ricciardo. He is a champion, right? He drives well. He just needs to be more consistent with that drive, or else, again, Yuki is now secured for V-carb. His spot is still a question mark.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest concern, especially when you got the likes of Liam Lawson waiting to potentially take in and swoop away.
The thing that RB are kind of taking advantage of at the moment is there are whispers about Yuki, and there are now positions that Yuki might fill with teams like Alpine and teams like Sauber and all that kind of stuff.
Next year.
So they had to secure Yuki. I don't think anyone's really going to try and take Ricciardo away from them. And I think that Liam is kind of really holding out for that Red Bull RB position. So they're not at a risk of losing Liam yet. So they're just kind of waiting to see what happens with Ricciardo. And it might be later in the year that they make the announcement. Like the biggest risk for them at the moment would probably be Mercedes, because Mercedes have Kimi Antonelli in contract. They can take their time to decide whether or not they want to give him the seat in 2025. But if they don't, then they can give someone else a seat and Kimi just stays in F2 for another year.
Yeah.
So there is still that question mark over, will Mercedes decide if Kimi is ready? And if they decide he isn't, there is a seat open. Potentially they could go and steal someone. But I think that's a really low risk for a lot of people. Sainz can't wait for that opportunity. He needs to secure himself a seat. So he's not going to go into that seat. It'll be wild to see what happens towards the second half of this year with drivers.
Yeah, but again, to your original point about Ricciardo forgetting the craft of racing and, and having to come back to that instead of being a brand ambassador, show pony, etc. That's what you're concerned about, right? Because if you're then not racing properly, you then don't have a seat, you then can't do all that fun stuff. So Daniel coming up and wisening up to this is, in my eyes, a little bit too late. I'm hoping now with this clarity that he has, it is more performances like this. because what we'll then eventually say is it's 2 races time and he's not been able to perform, then it's another excuse,
Yeah.
potentially.
Did you watch him jump starting video?
I remember it being talked about during the race, but I haven't watched anything else afterwards.
So I found the video online after the race. I had to watch the video about 20 times and zoom in on the tread of his intermediate tires to see the wheel move the tiniest half of an inch. And it wasn't even like, it was definitely not acceleration. It was potentially that he let the clutch out or he took his foot off the brake and the car just rolled half an inch. It was just the car settling into maybe a groove in the track. So horrible for him that he got a 5-second penalty for jump starting because the car rolled half an inch.
He took that during the race though, right?
He did.
Yeah. And again, still secured P8.
Yeah, like imagine what he could have done. He potentially could have had P7, like track position with 5 seconds earlier in the race could have made a big difference to his race. So
Yeah.
I literally, when I tell you I watched that video 20 times and had to zoom in, I literally had to watch that video 20 times and zoom in.
This is the spiciness coming to be for Aaron.
Yeah,
having
like
to watch it 20 times.
I'm like, I wanted to say, I'm like, I watched the video the first time. I'm like, the car didn't move. And then watched it the second time. I'm like, the car is not moving. And then, literally had to zoom in. And because there was also rain on the camera and all that kind of stuff, it was difficult to see. But yeah, you see the car move just the slightest amount.
Did you hear about the post-race interview with Ocon and Ricciardo about the Ricciardo swap with Gasly, which meant that Ocon's position had to be sacrificed for Gasly?
No.
Well, so Alpine wanted basically Gasly to go and challenge Ricciardo, which at the time, Gasly was behind Ocon. So they had to then switch the cars over. Ocon was not having it, didn't want to be like, okay, why chase him down? We're not going to go and chase him. I want this position. But team orders are coming on in. And then finally we get to a point where Gasly is in front of Ocon and we're getting a little spicy little moment. You could see in Ocon's face during the post-race interview going, why do we even bother? Not happy.
Yes. But at the end of the day, Ocon should be suffering. Like they should be preferencing Gasly after last week.
Well,
they said there would be consequences. They've now decided to part ways. Like all their attention, particularly at the moment, is going to be on Ocon. We know that teams will favor the driver that's going to stay. Where we know that, for example, Mercedes are going to be favoring Russell at the moment and Ferrari are going to be favoring Leclerc at the moment. So at the end of the day, Ocon now can't be upset about the fact that they're going to be focusing on Gasly as their driver. But on top of that, this comes just after he left or he announced his leaving and just after he made a huge mistake that fucked up their race last week. So he's in the worst of the bad books at the moment.
Yeah.
He's got to claw himself back up before he decides that he wants to have a go at team orders disadvantaging him.
Let's give him credit here also. You know, whilst he was unhappy about that move and kind of questioned the fact that they weren't going to chase Ricciardo for more points anyway, you know, he did play the role. He did switch over and everything, and he did play ball. So again, it's now just going to be this very interesting vibe energy on how Ocon's going to be presenting themselves during these post-race interviews with more on-track stuff. So it's going to be very interesting to kind of watch. But Alpine, 2 cars in points.
Yes. And I really want to know what's going to happen with Ocon next year. So he's probably the one that's kind of got the most room to go potentially anywhere. Like,
because we've got Haas still available.
Haas is available and he's competing with Ollie Behrman for that seat.
Mm-hmm.
We've got Kick Saba.
Yep. So they've locked in Hulkenberg for next year. So we don't know who else is going to be the second driver.
Yeah. So they might choose to keep Bottas or Zhou, or they could go down the path of getting Ocon.
But would they be focusing on Sainz, do you reckon, for the Audi partnership? Again, it's going to be very interesting to see where...
and they've got Sainz.
Yeah. So that's going to be very interesting. Williams is still an open slather.
Williams is also apparently looking at going towards Sainz, but there's potential now that they could take Ocon if they can't get Sainz. If they want to get rid of Logan, realistically, Williams could offer it to a lot of different people on the grid and potentially get a driver in that seat. I wonder where he'll go, whether he will have a seat next year, whether teams will look at him as a risk and decide not to take him.
Yeah. Again, I'm trying to remember, all these drivers are very talented. All these drivers deserve their seat. I think he did really well during the Renault years, Ocon. So
He's performed really well. He's a race winner.
yeah, true.
Like, so he's done well in his driving. He's just a prickly personality.
Prickly little personality.
And I think that's the risk for him working with a teammate is the problem for a lot of teams.
Yeah.
I think that where Sainz goes will determine what happens with Ocon.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like there's a really good chance that we'll see Sainz at Williams. For some reason, I just don't feel like he's responding well to the Audi opportunity. Like if he was going to take it, he would have taken it by now, I feel like. So I think he's probably going to end up at Williams. I feel like Audi will then maybe go, okay, well, we'll take Ocon because he's the best of what's left.
Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully we'll see. Speaking of Williams, sadly, another DNF for both cars. Albon's was heartbreaking to watch, but Logan damaged his car at lap 25.
Yeah.
It must be hard for that team to just be constantly rebuilding these cars.
And that's what we said last time. Like, I wonder how far progressed they would be this year had they had the opportunity to bring upgrades to their car instead of the fact that they are repairing their car every other week.
Yeah. But on the off-track side of things, if Sainz is getting court-shipped by Williams, there must be some sort of amazing plan brewing over there with James and Albon securing his seat up until like 2026. It has to be something.
That's what we've said from the fact that Albon has signed a contract. I also feel like James has a lot of clout. Like coming from his background, his relationship with Mercedes, he has a reputation that he will perform well and he will improve the team. And I think he just needs the time to do it.
Mm.
We've well and truly established that this year is always going to be a hard year for Williams, and crashes on top of that have just compounded the fact that there was going to be a hard year for them.
Yeah.
So I think if they get two good drivers in Albon and Sainz next year and they don't have the teething issues that they've had this year, they could be at the top of the middle of the pack kind of team. They could be the RB of next year.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, phenomenal drive by Williams with Albon at the seat. On the flip side, though, like, what is there to say about Sauber other than Zhou not looking competitive at all and, you know, DNFing not only in the race, but also in practice sessions? Bottas, not much else either.
I think that's probably the reason that Sainz has not taken them up on their offer of moving to the team. Like, yes, Audi will be a great team, and 2026 they will come in and they'll do what Audi does in every other series that they've competed in motorsports. They have excelled. That opportunity there would be really great if it was next year. I don't think Sainz wants to risk a year of being shit.
All these are backward steps technically for Sainz, right? So it's trying to figure out what's going to be the right backward step that might get him to win some races.
But that's the thing. I think there is talk of the fact that Audi might not be a backward step. Audi have full intentions of coming in and being competitive with the top tier cars. That being said, they haven't been in F1. They don't know what it's like.
Correct.
So,
and I'm not expecting a Brawn moment coming out of that team where they have literally read the rules so fantastically well, and Audi are basically number one when it comes to Melbourne in 2026. I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think it's going to be that magical.
I think that's what they're hoping for, though.
I think so. I think that's what the vibe they're trying to emulate. But as you're saying, this Sainz, if it was going to pull him in, hopefully should have been under contract by now.
Yeah, that's where I think the performance of Stake is just not enough of a convincing thing for Sainz. And the performance that we're seeing from Zhou and Bottas, not even just from them, but from the team, the pace, the car, the pits, everything just is not where it needs to be.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't instill confidence.
All right, shall we? Let's move on to our tops and bottoms of the week, Aaron.
Sure.
I'm going to start with mine first, if that's all right.
Okay.
Well, you know, I've just been polite here. Very polite. I'm a polite lady. Polite lady.
I love that it was a demand followed by, if that's all right.
Well, a polite lady demands polite things. Anyway, my top is going to be that beautiful overtake by Albon. Not one, but two cars. It was like threading the needle between an Alpine and a V-carb to get to P9. It was, again, driving through the line, wet everywhere around him. It was, stunning.
I think the most fascinating thing about it was the only way that any of that happened without a crash was him pulling off this overtake.
Yes, he needed to do the overtake. Once he committed in, he had to go and do it.
Yeah, once he was in that spot, if he didn't complete that overtake and didn't do it perfectly, it was a crash. So it's kind of like, of the 100 scenarios that could have happened from that moment, one of them was this perfect overtake and the other 99 were 3 cars destroyed. And he just managed to pull that one outcome out. And I think like he was centimeters away from both cars at one point at the same time.
The aerial footage was amazing. The onboard was amazing. It was mwah. And again, it just gives you hope that with Albon and that Williams, when they're competitive, they're great.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was mwah.
I wouldn't even say that it was 2 overtakes chained together because he hadn't even finished overtaking the V-carb before he was overtaking the Alpine.
It was beautiful, beautiful. My bottom of the week, though, is going to go easily strategic team at Ferrari. What a shit show. Clowns. Big feet, red noses. It was just, I don't know if they had a junior on, right, for Leclerc, but it felt like it was toddler time. So many instances being on the wrong tire at the practice. It was just terrible.
I don't have anything to say. I don't know what happened.
Yeah, even the comms where you're listening to the radio, it just didn't feel right. Like I said, I wonder if there was a junior team on for that weekend. They couldn't fly everyone into Canada. Aaron, what are your tops and bottoms of the week?
So my top would be just the general competitiveness of the drivers at the front of the pack. Like we now have cars in 4, potentially 5 teams with Mercedes, McLaren, Red Bull, Ferrari, and Aston, I'll include.
That's nice of you.
We have 5 cars that all can compete with each other. So the cars now are not the limiting factor. Now we're seeing the difference in the drivers' skills really starting to show. So we might see Leclerc do better than Norris in one race because Leclerc just knows how to drive that track better. And then we might see Norris doing better than Leclerc in another track because Norris knows how to drive that track better. The fact that the drivers are now the reason that we're seeing performance, I think, is important.
Yeah, no, I think that makes it quite exciting. It's the reason why I love this race in the end. Like 5 drivers battling it out for most of the actual race. It was perfect to see. Now, what's your bottom?
My bottom is Perez's contract extension. It's just closed so many doors for what potentially could happen next year. I feel like even if they didn't put, say, Ricciardo into that seat, or they did go with someone like Sainz or something like that, it just creates a lot more opportunities for people like Liam Lawson to get into a seat. I feel like just keeping Perez there and keeping Perez there for potentially 2 more years, it's just left a spot that should have gone to someone else.
Yeah.
Closed.
Yeah, I reckon you'll probably still get your Liam Lawson moment, Aaron. I just don't think it's going to be within that RB family. As reluctant as he may want to go move somewhere else and not have that progression up into Red Bull, I reckon he might become a free agent because you can go and get a seat at Alpine. You can go and get a seat at Sauber, turning into Audi. Those are legitimate options so far. It's better to be on the track, as we've seen with Oscar, than being off it and sidelined by this team.
Yeah, I do wonder, speaking of, say, Alpine and Oscar, I do wonder whether they will make sure to not mess up the potential of having Jack Doohan in the seat.
It's true.
They know what happens if they fuck up the movement of their reserve driver into their team. So I wonder whether they won't make the same mistake next year.
Yeah, true. Cool. Well, that brings us to the end of another spectacular Grand Prix. And thank you so much, Montreal. It was stunning. You gave me wings to fly, and I'm alive.
Do you reckon you got any more Celine Dion references?
Oh, Trust me. We are now on a small 2-week break with the Spanish Grand Prix in Barcelona happening on the 23rd of June. My memories of Barcelona while away in Europe are all coming back to me now. As always, that was a good one. I like that one. As always, make sure you are subscribed to Let's Talk wherever you get your favorite podcasts. And of course, leave a review. It helps us with the algorithm overlords. Now, if you want to get involved in the conversation, come and find us on social media at Let's Talk Show. Leave us a comment. Let us know your tops and bottoms of the week. Thank you everyone for tuning in. And now let's stay forever this way. You are safe in our hearts and our hearts will go on and on. Goodbye and catch you next time on Let's Talk.
Let's Talk is hosted, produced, and edited by Shaun and Aaron Best. Our show is an entertainment podcast. The views expressed by the hosts and guests are for entertainment purposes only. Let's Talk is recorded in Paran in Naarm, Melbourne, and we would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung and Bunurong people of the East Kulin Nation, the traditional owners of the land. We pay our respects to elders, past, present, and emerging.